down to the actual choices that are made as part of strategy. So there'll be two sections to today's session. The first bit will be just introducing the concept of strategic choices, just a couple of slides on that, and then we'll move into business level strategies. So this is all about making a competitive difference in the organisation relative to the competitors. Now, those competitors, of course, can be anything. If it's a commercial enterprise, then there are other organisations in the industry that's doing the same thing or offering substitute products or services. If it's the government sector, then it's other government organisations which are competing for funding. If it's the NGO sector, such as charities, then it's other charities that are competing for not only attention to get funding and donations, but also the opportunity to make a difference, because in many cases the target of these sorts of organisations, there's competition between governments and other charities and so forth to fulfil a role. And you might think, well, that's great. So it's a charity and there's more than one group interested in them. That's a good thing, but not necessarily, because if they have competing objectives, then partial completion of each of those objectives results in no net benefit. So in many cases, when you're dealing with, say, a humanitarian crisis or something like that, then it's very important that a single set of objectives is applied rather than a multiple set of objectives provided by a multiple set of organisations poorly provided. So in reality, there isn't a type of enterprise that isn't exposed to competition because all organisations run on resources, strategic resources. They all have stakeholders, customers, or some type of party that's influenced by them, and they all have systems and people in them. So when you get down to it, the internals are not that different. It's just the objectives, some of the external forces that they're exposed to, and a few of the finer points of operations, such as salary structures and things like that. So organisations need to think about how they can become most effective, and I guess the point Porter's making in this slide is it's not just about being efficient, it's actually about doing the right thing and in the right way. So that's what business level strategy is all about, getting it right first and then working out how you can do that as well as possible, rather than focusing on just improving what you already have, which may not be the right thing to be doing, or perhaps it was the right thing to be doing in the past but is no longer because the world has changed. So in determining strategy, what we want to do, as Hamill suggests, is go a little bit beyond just saying, oh, this is great, we've got a new product, everyone's going to want that, or there's a little segment of the market that no one's addressing. That's fine, but it's not a principal role of strategy. It's something sometimes you fall into and you say, we'll use this and we'll use it for a particular objective, such as building up our organisation's capability before we extend. But where an organisation really wants to be is in a large, clear space. And Kim and Malborn refers to this as a blue ocean, the idea that you're in a space where there's not a high level of competition, where the organisation is free to grow fairly rapidly. And if you consider the a biological analogy, which I like to draw on a lot, because there isn't, from a systems perspective, there isn't so much difference in the way an organisation operates and an organism, such as a tree. We all know that for a tree to prosper, to grow, to be able to access enough resources in the ground, enough sunlight, to develop a proper structure, it needs space. If it's extremely hemmed in by other trees or other constraints, if there is a massive amount of competition for resources, if there is not much function for that tree, it can't spread its seed and so forth, then it's not going to do very well. And that biological analogy is very true for organisations as well. So an organisation should be in a space where there is enough room. And from a macro perspective, if you extend this analogy to perhaps being a forester who has a whole plantation of trees, then you take a systems view. You don't want to overplant your plantation, because all the trees will be competing and you won't be making the best use of the resources, which is the sunlight, the rain and the soil. So from a macro perspective, it also doesn't make sense to have overcrowded competition, because that will result in poor utilisation of resources. So there is going to be an optimal density, if you like, of organisations where each organisation can run effectively and reach an efficient size and achieve good economies of scale and have access to enough resources. And beyond that, too many organisations are going to result in a larger number of poor performing organisations. Now, of course, life's not that simple. All the markets are highly fragmented, segmented, and of course we have distributions of small businesses and large businesses and emerging businesses and things like that. So it's not quite that simple. But from a strictly resource utilisation perspective, the most responsible approach is to establish the organisation in a position, in a market, in an environment, with a product and certainly a strategy that can enable it to make a significant difference, rather than simply replicating what's already there. So we have three dimensions to strategy. We have the theoretical component, which is the left component, the ideas that we have. Now, we've already talked about the fact that with strategy, ideas are planned because we want to be somewhere in the future, but they're also emergent in the sense that we look at what we're doing and we realise, because of responding to the environment and other influences, we have, without knowing it, made a strategic choice. So the business strategy is comprised of conscious and planned decisions that we make that are implemented over time, and things that we have done because we needed to, which we discover have stayed with us, have become permanent, have become significant, and constitute a dimension of strategy in their own right. So those are the choices that we make, the choices that we intentionally plan, and the choices that are made by virtue of our actions, which actions we needed to take. The competitor cut their prices, so you cut your prices, and then before you realise it, you discover you're a cost leader in the industry. That was an accidental decision, but nevertheless a decision. Then we have our directions, which are really basically the choice of what we offer to in that particular area, choice of products, what markets we approach, and then the methods. And organic refers to the idea of these emergent strategies, or we can grow through acquisition. We can say we're simply going to buy into that market, or we can establish a partnership. So we've got three different components: the choices about how we compete, the choices about what we compete with, and the choices about structure. So that's just a brief introduction to the idea of strategy as a choice process. And I think that's the key thing. And where a strategist, where the board, where senior management adds value is in making those choices. Most of the organisation is either engaged in the actual doing of the processes or controlling those processes to make them run as effectively as possible according to whatever we have determined constitutes an effective operation. Could be cost, could be quality, could be reliability, could be labour utilisation, could be a range of things. And so it's up to senior management to try to coordinate all of these activities and bring them into a coherent and focused set of activities that will lead to an advantage. And the only way of doing that, of course, is to look outside, to take a macro view and say, if we align all of these things in this direction, then this will make us the highest quality producer. This will enable us to offer something to a market that doesn't yet exist or that is just emerging, that we can become a significant contributor to, a significant operator in. We can align technologies that are coming through with where we want to be in the future. So, yes, so those are the sorts of choices. You see extreme versions, I guess, with Tesla. They're looking at, well, what can we be doing in the future? Getting involved in commercial space flight, obviously with targets of being either a provider to that industry or utilising commercial space travel to run enterprises in other locations, and obviously filling other markets. So those are fairly extreme cases. I think Richard Branson probably a step back from that, but still the idea of, well, how can I do things fairly significantly differently to create a new type of value? And then we move back to highly competitive organisations where they produce basically the same product, like, for example, computer mouses. There's a huge range of those available in the market. There's dominant players and then there's minor ones. They're all producing basically the same product. They're differentiating in a very small way. Perhaps there's some value adding there, but we all know that ultimately many of those organisations won't survive because there really isn't enough room in that particular market for them all to have enough chance to grow effectively. And so some of them will suffer the consequences of that competition, and they won't be able to develop. So we see varying choices, and clearly the more dramatic and creative the choices, the more scope for development. But there's a downside, of course, with dramatic and visionary and innovative choices. Can anyone tell me what that downside would be? Risk goes up as creativity goes up. So if you're making computer mice, you know pretty much everything about it. And if you think you've got a way of cutting the price by 5%, then you'll get sales. That's very predictable. But it's hard work and the opportunities are limited, and then someone else will come along and do the same thing. So you're always chasing your tail. But it's a fairly predictable environment. Most of what you need to know has already been worked out, and you can observe the behaviours of others in the industry to identify that. But if you're going to something quite crazy, so joining two very different lines of business. So Branson might say, well, you know, although he doesn't have so much in the way of airlines anymore, nevertheless, I've got these airlines. I might buy a travel agency, and I might also buy an online travel a media site like Expedia or something, and we'll stick them all together. And then I'll have this macro package where you get literally everything. I guess a lot of companies is trying to sort of slide into that. Qantas is trying to slide into that little bit with their online hotels and bookings and things. But he could jump into that in a big way. It's a risk because there's no one else is making that combination. There's nothing to learn from. You're the first mover, and so there's a huge amount of uncertainty around that. Hence, the level of risk goes up with the creativity of the strategic choices that are being made. And that's what organisations are all about. They're all about managed risk. How much risk can you afford? And generally the return for a high degree of risk is potentially greater than the return for a low degree of risk. So if you say, great, we can produce a mouse and it's 5% cheaper, that organisation is going to be a very low profit margin organisation, most likely. So their real return for being in that market is quite low, and they will therefore have a small return, but they're also taking a small risk. But if you take a large risk and you create a whole new market and you're the main provider to that market and no one else is going to be set up in that market for years, then there's an opportunity to make a lot of return. Or if it's, for example, a charity organisation, it's an opportunity to do a lot of good or create a lot of benefit. So let's, at the business strategy level, let's look at some of the learning outcomes. Firstly, what constitutes a strategic business unit? And so, as I said, I wanted to talk about that a little bit more about that today. We talked about that right back in the first lecture, and there's actually a section on the textbook, but quite a few people have asked about that. And the answer to this, I think, is pretty simple. A strategic business unit is not, first of all, is not either a department or a product line. They follow very much after business level strategy. They are a part of operational level strategy. What a business unit is from a strategic perspective is an entity in the organisation or the organisation itself, depending on the scale of things, that is fully dedicated to a particular market environment. So it has a particular set of environmental conditions to it. It takes a particular set of strategic decisions and it services a group in totality. So that when the environment changes, it changes all of that business unit. And why we're concerned about that is because we can't execute business level strategy with a single department. And yes, if you happen to work in a marketing department, you say, oh, but we've got a marketing level strategy. You do have a strategy for the marketing department, but that's the functional level strategy. That follows on from the business level strategy. If marketing would say, we're going to really make use of our networks to promote the quality and features of our product, but the strategic business decision is to compete on the basis of cost and have a simple, low-cost product produced in high volumes, then that marketing functional level strategy is completely out of phase or is completely inappropriate for the business level strategy. So each of the department level strategies have to follow the business level strategy so that they contribute to how the organisation has decided to compete using their own particular resources. So the strategic business unit is a division of a multi-division, a diversified company, perhaps a single business that they own that does one thing, like a transportation business. Or if the organisation just does one thing, it's the whole enterprise itself. But you have to be able to implement all of the functional activities required to achieve that business level strategy in the business unit. Now, of course, there are a couple of exceptions. In a diversified business, we might say, you know what, finance is finance for everybody. To a fair extent, because these are related businesses that we've acquired, a lot of our marketing is pretty common to all of them as well. Strategic planning is common. So we're going to pull those activities out and we're going to centralise those. Then we're going to leave these enterprises to do everything else. We would still call those business level strategy because for practical purposes, each of those individual businesses, even though they've had a couple of functions pulled out of them and centralised, they're still able to fully execute business level strategy. So one of them can compete on the basis of cost and the next one can still compete on the basis of quality, even though they share the same centralised finance service. Now, of course, a bit of a nightmare for the finance service because one business unit says, no, you've got to buy we're going for the cheapest, that's our justification. Another one says, no, we're going for the highest quality capital investment, that's our justification. So a bit of a nightmare for the poor old finance people who have to have different finance approaches for the different business units, but that's their problem. It doesn't limit each of the business units from still following an independent business level strategy. So for practical purposes, even though there might be a few centralised activities, we can still call each of these an individual business service. Probably the great example of that in Australia is the government. So the government has centralised finance, they call it Treasury. But we have very different business units. We've got the tax office, we've got education, we've got the hospitals and so forth. They're very different. And each one of those, perhaps even each hospital, you can reasonably argue is a business unit, but certainly the healthcare network is a business unit, the ATO is a business unit. And even though it has to interact very strongly with Treasury and it gets government policy as part of its strategic decision making, it's still able to execute business level strategy. So that's a strategic business unit, that's the definition. Just to repeat one more time, it can't be a functional group, it can't be a division in the organisation, because that's not capable of implementing a business level strategy. It has to be a combination of departments that constitutes an organisation which is fully capable of implementing a business level strategy, such as the decision to compete on the basis of cost, or to be differentiated, or compete on the basis of quality, or whatever it happens to be. Is that fairly clear? Yeah, no problems with that? Yep.
Various divisions of the organization and the central strategy of the organization, are they always compatible? For example, like if the marketing department has their own strategy, and like you said, that sometimes if the centralized strategy of the organization, there's a debate between which strategy has to be implemented. Obviously, the marketing strategy won't be given more problems to when it comes to actually comparing these two strategies. But if you're talking, if every division has their own particular strategy, is it always compatible on a central level?
So the question was, just for the recording, do functional level strategies always need to be consistent with the business level strategy, and do you always have functional level strategies? And the answer is yes to both. If the functional level strategy is inconsistent with the business level strategy, then you have problems. If there is no functional level strategy in a particular department, then you have problems. Does it occur? Absolutely, all of the time. Why does it occur? Because there is a phased approach, and we really lack a whiteboard here, so I'm going to have to just try and do a diagram in the air. At corporate level strategy, we decide about the structure of the organisation. We're going to do a restructure. We had departments, now we're going to have fewer departments. We're going to integrate a few things. We're going to integrate finance and accounting, because in our new environment, there's so much crossover, they work together better as a group. We're going to acquire a whole new business unit because we want to vertically integrate. We used to manufacture and then we get someone else to deliver. It's been an ongoing problem. It's really getting in the way of our competitiveness. We're going to acquire a fleet of vehicles and we're going to be our own distributor, and so forth and so on. So these are corporate level strategy decisions, big, large-scale structural changes. Going back to the analogy of the tree, putting a new branch on, putting a new root out, doing something quite different. So we call that corporate level strategy. Then we have a business level strategy, and if we have several business units, we've got a new transport business unit. It services our organisation, but other organisations as well. Now, it's known for being 100% reliable. If they say that they're going to deliver at 12:03 p.m. on Thursday the 2nd of August, then that's when they're there. So that's one of their characteristics. But our manufacturing is very low cost. It's not the best quality, but it's consistent quality, but we're the cheapest in the market. So yes, you can have these different business level strategies. Then the next tier down, of course, as I said, is the functional level strategy. Now, you can imagine what happens. The corporate level strategy, we're going to set up a new business unit. It takes years. So although you make the decision, that's going to be years before that new business unit is fully operational and working as well as it should. The business level strategy is a bit faster. It's like, we're going to compete on the basis of cost. Okay, that's good. Well, let's just start doing it. The functional level strategy, even a little bit faster still. Okay, so in manufacturing, we're going to get our costs down. Okay, well, how do we get the costs down? Well, let's see. We can upgrade our equipment. We can reduce our staffing levels. We operate 2 sites. It's always been a subject of inefficiency. We could try and consolidate on 1 site. We can make some changes. So all of these strategies are going to be implemented at different rates. So if you look, and I'm going to swap analogies, I apologise for that. If you consider the organisation as a ship that has this huge momentum, and you say, well, we're going to do a right-hand turn. Yep, 5 kilometres later, we actually achieve the right-hand turn, because that's how far our momentum drives us before we achieve that change. If you consider that with all of these momentums moving forwards, then all of these strategies are going to unfold at different times. So even though they may have been initiated with the correct conditions in mind, when you take a snapshot in time, like you look at that cruise ship 10 minutes later, no change in direction. I thought you were going to do a right-hand turn. Yeah, we're doing a right-hand turn. I'll look another 10 minutes. Still don't seem to be doing the right-hand turn. What's going on? Well, we're doing the right-hand turn. Come back in half an hour's time and you'll see some real action. Although each of these functional, business and corporate level strategies will be initiated in response to the correct circumstances, most of the time, sometimes it's a bad decision but doesn't make any difference, given that they will make the choice, then it unfolds and it takes a certain period of time. So if you take a snapshot in time, you're seeing strategies that are still being implemented, strategies that are fully implemented, strategies that are just starting, strategies that relate to one condition which is no longer apparent, strategies that relate to a different condition which is yet to arrive. And so you'll never see complete consistency from the corporate, business and functional level strategy all the way down because of the time it takes to unfold all of these. So organisations are constantly struggling. I know at the functional level strategy, I know we're driving the functional level strategy to focus on cost, but that was for our old business level strategy. Now we've changed our business level strategy because guess what? Trump's come in and he's terminated all trade with China and the whole deal is completely new. So we're now changing our business level strategy because we're flooded with Chinese products here. We're going to focus on the basis of quality. And yeah, I know we had all this functional level strategy around cost, but stop right now. We're going to start going on quality. And so organisations are constantly in this cycle of saying, got to stop that, oh, that was really good, but it's no longer the right thing. We've changed our mind, we're doing different things. We're going to acquire a business unit. We were really surprised. We had no idea our competitor was about to go out of business, but guess what? They had been defrauding if anyone's been listening to AMP, they've been defrauding the regulators. They were actually no longer solvent. They were trading insolvently and they've been shut down. And we can acquire their business. We can acquire their resources, their staff, their markets. We're going to do it. Big change, dramatic change. So put the brakes on all of these things. We've got to change our business and our functional level strategies. So that's the reality. It's very, very dynamic. And so if you do ever look at an organisation, take a cross-sectional snapshot in time, you'll see different strategic activities at different levels which just reflect the conditions at the time they were initiated. So quite complicated in reality. So today we're going to look at the generic business strategies of cost, leadership, differentiation and focus. We've already been talking about those. How you choose products and markets. So this is a little bit more long-term focused than traditional marketing, but very much the same as strategic marketing. And many of the discipline areas, HR and so forth, recognise the fact that there is a functional functional strategy dimension to what they do, what marketing does, by calling that strategic marketing, strategic HR and so forth, then those disciplines are reflecting on their role in terms of these sorts of choices. And then the different structural changes, item number 4. So we've already done this. What is the single business unit? Just as a quick summary therefore, the strategy is decentralised in the sense that that business unit has control over its business level strategy, although the corporate level strategy will determine the bigger structure of the organisation. And so each business level strategy is potentially fully able to execute an individual business level strategy. And that's the defining feature, but it must be fully capable as opposed to being a functional level strategy, which is just part of a group of activities that supports a business level strategy. And therefore each business unit is accountable. A corporate enterprise can have some business units that are doing fantastically, some that are doing okay, and some that they've got real problems. They can sell off one business unit, acquire another business unit. They are building blocks. There should be some aggregation of these, and in the corporate level strategy section, when we look at that, we'll start to think about the merits of related versus unrelated diversification. And just to give you a little bit of a spoiler, the idea is, of course, that if all of your business units are related, then you can share technology and people and stuff like that, and maybe some information platforms and a few things, and so get bigger economies of scale and more utilisation out of those. So that's a good thing. But we're talking about business units. They're not people, they're not things like houses, they're very large, and there's not a lot of them in the world. There's just not that many business units in the world. There's probably still millions, but there's not a huge a range of choice, if you like, or there's not a huge number of these. So they tend to be quite individualistic and different. And so the idea that we're going to have a set of business units that are all perfectly related, in practice, is incredibly difficult to achieve. And if you try and set up a set of business units that are all highly related, inevitably you're going to try and push some into markets where it's just very difficult to compete. So the upshot of this is we find from observation that companies with unrelated business units, transport, medicine, education, retail, hospitality, but choose the business units that those business units are really focused on an attractive market, do just as well as those companies with a suite of very neatly arranged business units that are all well related, because some of them really aren't in very good markets as a result of trying to make them all related, and so they bring the overall performance down. Nevertheless, business units therefore are responsible, and there's a high degree of interchangeability and modularity around them. All right, so we have Michael Porter to thank for the idea of these generic business level strategies. And basically, the idea is we create a competitive business level strategy. It's not structural strategy. It's not about how the organisation structures itself, about the acquisition of business units. It is about a business unit and how it achieves a competitive advantage in wherever we're putting it. And the competitive advantage is, of course, based on what it achieves as its operational, functional level strategy in terms of what value it creates for whoever the stakeholders are in that particular area. So pretty straightforward. So here's the bottom line. It basically means, and we haven't changed our views about this since Porter produced this in the 80s, it basically means there's two dimensions you can consider. One is the scope of the organisation. Does it have a broad stakeholder group or a narrow stakeholder group? Is it niche, or is it something like David Jones, Myers, Amazon, very broad in the services it provides, or products and services it provides? And what are we offering? And there seems to be generally still to this day basically only two ways of offering products or services to the market that interest people. One is it cheap? Or two, is it good? And good, of course, constitutes anything. It's so probably the best example, which you don't see anymore, of differentiation was Myers when I was young. If you're planning to go overseas, you would go to Myers because you would go there, you would buy some clothes in the clothes department, then you go to the luggage department and buy a suitcase to put the clothes in. Then you go to the travel department and book your flights. Then you get a bit hungry, so you go to the cafeteria area, have something to eat. Then you go and get a haircut, all in Myers, in preparation for your travel. Then you go and see the medical service in Myers to have your vaccinations. You didn't need to leave the building. So that was hugely differentiated. And so the idea that Myers had, and they were one of the first companies to introduce a credit card type system, was that you got everything there. They were very broadly differentiated. Pretty much homewares, health, food, you named it, it was all there. So very broadly differentiated, and if you could afford to shop at Myers at that stage, it was a relatively expensive outlet, then you didn't need to worry about going anywhere else. It was all there. So it was highly differentiated. Was it cheap? No. Why? Because they had so many different departments. There was no economies of scale around those. It was all around being differentiated. So that's an example of good. Another example of differentiated is we offer unusual travel opportunities. We are producing electric cars. These are forms of differentiation. So when priced a Tesla car, although they're going to come in with a cheaper model, the current model is $120,000, which is a lot for what they're offering. So it's not about being cheap. It's about being different. So generally, it's cheap or different. It would be great if you could have both, but no one's cracked that ever. As soon as you start adding more features, you inevitably, to make things better, really good, then you tend to add cost. So it's only the very simplest, leanest of operations that manage to be cost leaders. Now, you can be economical, but that's not a basis of competition. That enables you to make more profit. So if you're like Myers and you're very broadly differentiated, you can have everything there in the store, and you work really hard to get your costs down. You're going to get them down a bit, but you're not going to be a cost leader. There's no way you can ever be a cost leader in that situation. So it's very important to be objective and externally focused and not say, yes, they've dropped their price by 10%, they're a cost leader. No, they're not. Because if they're not the cheapest, they're not a cost leader. If you can buy a suitcase, if you can get some clothes, if you can get a haircut, you can get a medical appointment, you can book your flights 5% cheaper somewhere else, then the more expensive organisation is not a cost leader no matter what they do. And it's also a mistake to say, in the segment of highly differentiated companies, this is a cost leader. Again, it doesn't really make sense. Because when you think about it practically, most of the products are transferable across segments. No one is going to say, look, I've got a lot of money and I'm quite comfortable spending it, so I'd like to go to very high quality shops, but I go to this one because it's the cheapest of the high quality shops. It really doesn't make any sense. So we find, even to this day, many, many years later, that the base of the competitive advantage tends to be you're just the cheapest. You've got, obviously, base level quality and reliability and safety and so forth, because that's a condition for being in business as opposed to competing, or you're differentiated and there's something special about you. And those are still the two modes. So we've got 4 examples here. If your scope is big, you want as many customers as possible, and you're a cost leader, then you're a company like Jetstar, which tries to be like a cheap version of Qantas. It says, like, we'll fly everywhere, and but we're cheap. That has a consequence if you compare that with the other airline in this, which is a narrow target, Tiger. Has anyone flown Tiger? Yes? They're very cheap, right? They're cheaper than Jetstar. What's the negative feature of Tiger, apart from the operational conditions, but from a business level strategy? What have they chosen to do to be cheaper than Jetstar? Long stopover. Yeah, that's better. They don't fly everywhere. You can't always use Tiger. You want to go somewhere? No, Tiger doesn't go there. You want to go from somewhere? Tiger doesn't go there. Does Jetstar? Yeah, probably does. So Jetstar is servicing a broader range of customers, people who want to go from here to there and there to there and to these different locations, whereas Tiger just serves a couple of key markets. So Tiger is cheaper because it has bigger economies, but if you want to, sometimes you just can't use Tiger, but you can still use Jetstar. So that's the difference. They're both the cheapest, but 2 different market segments. So people wanting to fly from Perth to Brisbane can't really use Tiger. It's unattractive. So they're not in that market at all. So they're not, they don't have a broad competitive scope. They've got a narrow competitive scope. Aldi is the same. If you go into Aldi and you want to buy some product, it's not necessarily there. If you want to go there and buy milk and bread and stuff like that, it's there. So what that means is when someone needs to buy something that you could get at Coles or Woolworths, but can't get at Aldi, they're not in that game. They don't make that sale. So they have a narrow target of basic products. And as I mentioned before, I think in the first lecture, 600 products versus 30,000 products. There is a reason for the 30,000 products. There's no way that Coles or Woolworths carries that many products just for the fun of it or by accident. They're doing that because they know that when you go to the supermarket, you can get all the things you need, and that's why people who are a little less price sensitive but very time sensitive will say, I'm going to Woolworths because I don't have the time to go to Aldi and then go to Woolworths or go somewhere else to get the rest of the things I need. So broad target, more people. From the cost competitive perspective, your costs are a little bit higher because you've got to do more things. Narrow target, great, real economies of scale. You can be the cheapest in the whole sector, but you'll miss out on business. So consequently, Jetstar is much bigger than Tiger in Australia. Okay, then we've got the differentiation side. That's Qantas. Qantas flies anyone, anywhere. They fly to a few less places than they used to. I was on the last Qantas flight to Rome, for example. They used to have a direct flight to Rome. They don't do that anymore. What have they done? They're still broadly differentiated. You can still go everywhere. It's a relatively comfortable flight. You might complain about the food, but it's supposed to be a special service, a luxury service. As we discussed, I think, in the last session, they still have the claim to safety and they're very reliable in terms of their punctuality. So, you know, if you're a business traveller, you don't care too much about the price. You want it to be comfortable. You want it to be reliable, you want it to be safe, you're not going to take any personal risks just on behalf of your organisation, then Qantas is more attractive and the price is not an issue. But Qantas has reduced the number of places it flies to. Why has it done that? Well, you'll see by way of example, it's cut its prices. It has made itself cheaper. So what it's actually done, so I can't actually, whoop, very sensitive. It's moved from being maybe over here to more like over there. So it's moving in this direction. It's making its costs cheaper, it's reducing the amount of differentiation. You've got to catch more connecting flights with Qantas than you used to. The comfort levels are probably down a little bit. They've got those giant planes like the A380. Has anyone been in an A380? The main deck is massive, but it's also chaotic, isn't it? It's just like you're in a marketplace or something like that. It's got very little to do with serene, quiet air travel. It's not even a bus, it's something else. It's like they've taken a shopping mall and they put wings on it. So it's about volume travel. You know, and then they've got those service bars where you go and self-serve, you don't even get personal service and things like that. So it's sort of like cafeteria, it's like a shopping mall with a cafeteria with wings. So they're moving in this direction because it's cheaper. So what happens when they hit this point here? Or say just over the line, so they get just over there, because there'll be some customer loyalty. What happens when they get to there? They become Jetstar, don't they? So you become what your strategy is. So as they appear, if they keep continuing to do it, as they move there, they're eventually going to say, we're just going to call it Quanjet or JetTaz or something like that, or they're just going to join the names because it's the same organisation, right? Planes, same owners, same business level strategy. It is the same organisation. No. And in actual fact, there is a little spot here which is very interesting. It's called best value. Let's see if I can just quickly add. Where's my textbook gone? Text box is gone. Oh, come on, text box. Insert. Where is it? Okay. There's this little area here which you can call and just colour the background. Shape it a little bit. Make it that colour. Best value is this interesting juncture between everything. As you can see where it's positioned. It's sort of not broadly differentiated, but it's not narrow. So it can service a lot of people. It's not really broadly differentiated, but it's not just about being cheap and nasty. It's about somewhere in the middle. And for example, if you go and buy a car, most people don't say, I'm going to have the cheapest car, I'm going to have the car with the best features. What do you buy? Sorry, I couldn't hear. Subaru, right. And why would you buy a Subaru? So how would you describe it then overall? What was your perception? Better value, yeah. Best value. So best value is great. Everyone wants best value. No question about that. Why don't all organisations say, great, best value, let's just do that. We don't have to be the cheapest, that's really hard. We don't have to be broadly differentiated, that's really hard. We don't have to service everyone, that's really hard. We don't have to be reliant on a single little niche, which is really risky. Why don't they all just do that? Because it's
confusing for organizations because they don't cater to this one.
It's confusing, but if you broadly differentiate, oops, you're in that boat anyway, but you're quite close to the point. Yes, I think that's also extremely close to it. You're just about on the money. Best value, what constitutes best value, changes almost daily, right? Trump does something and everyone thinks, oh my God, what's going to happen next? Then we all become a little more conservative. So our comfortable spending goes down by 5%. One of the one of the game console companies produces a new type of game, and it's really just becomes very popular. Everyone wants a bit more technology. And so in reality, it's this constant balance between being differentiated and being cheap. And you almost got to change it on a daily basis. Now, Target claim this territory. You know, Target, the retail outlet, they claim this territory. You see the ads like, all our clothes are indestructible, but they're cheap. We've got all the basics you need. They're good quality, but they're cheap. You've seen these ads? No, okay, well that's their claim. Now, they are a distribution agent organisation. They purchase overseas, made in China, and then they bring the clothing in lots and their products, and then they sell it in the stores. This is an exhausting proposition for them because to constantly chase what is perceived to be best value, almost literally that day, certainly sort of that week, they have to keep deconstructing and reconstructing their supply chains. They can't go back to the same supplier and say, we'll have another load of T-shirts, because the T-shirts have to be, this order, 10% more luxurious. And the next order, they have to be 10% cheaper. And so constantly they are making these adjustments, which ripple out and create tsunamis of change throughout the organisation. It's an exhausting place to be because it's just constant change as you're constantly tracking this best value proposition. So to go back to your example, it was the Subaru Forester deal was almost like that week, wasn't it? If you'd bought the car 2 weeks later, you might have made different decisions because the prices would have changed and new features would have come in and other features would have. So what people are looking for, expecting, is this tremendously dynamic thing in this best value position. So what organisations like Qantas or Jetstar will do is, as they find themselves drifting, they will often go to this point, and I suspect this is where Qantas is heading to. It's a great place to make money. You can be quite profitable because you're a little less differentiated, so you're a little more efficient. You've got a decent sized market because you're not a niche, so you can make some good money, but no organisation I've ever seen can stay there long term. They wear themselves out. Everybody in the organisation is sick of the change. They're sick of the lack of consistency and standardisation. Life is too hard. So they'll spend a few years there. they will become profitable and pay off their debts, and then they'll move out. And they'll move into this domain or that domain or back into this domain, maybe in the case of Qantas again, with renewed resources, having taken that opportunity to say, okay, we'll make a bit of money, we'll think about this and we'll go back. So this is like a resting place. In, you know, the game of Monopoly. How many know Monopoly? No? Yes, okay, a few people know. There's this thing called free parking, right, which you get halfway around the board, and it's just nothing. It's just you just sit there. There's no, you can't buy property, you don't get penalised, nothing happens. So this is a bit like that's what's free parking. You just sit there, rest, recuperate, bring in a bit of cash, rethink, and then move on to a different spot. That's not part of Porter's strategy, but we observe that in practice. So it's not examinable. All right, cost leadership, great. Basically, very simply and easily put, the more you do, usually, unless you make a big mistake, the cheaper it becomes. If you've got to make one mouse, you've got to make it by... The buttons are dangerous. If you have to make one mouse, then you've got to make it by hand, and it's going to take you like, well, actually more than a day. It's going to take you days to make this. If you have a machine that makes the casing and does the circuits, and et cetera, then you can make 1,000,000 of these an hour. Even though the machine is more expensive than the person when you... Why on earth is it doing that? Sorry about that. Even though the machine is more expensive than the person, the people, the machine is able to process many times more than the person, and so the overall cost goes down. And that's the whole basis of the Industrial Revolution. You get people hand-making bricks, or you get a machine hand-making bricks assisted by people. The machine produces a brick of a lower cost than making them by hand. So basically, the bigger our volumes are, the cheaper we get, to a certain point. And after that, other factors start to creep in and they start to drive our costs up. Why couldn't you make all the bricks required in the world in one giant big brick factory, right? Massive economies of scale, can't go beyond that. Every brick that's used in the world made in Melbourne. What's wrong with that? It's a good idea. Should we start up the mega brick company and put everyone else out of business? Cheapest bricks? What's wrong with that idea? There's something wrong. You know there is. Well, let's say there's lots of clay in Victoria. Let's just say we've got enough clay and then we just need a bit of electricity and a bit of coal. We've got lots of coal. We'll run it with coal, even though it's a bit, we might have some regulatory issues. Big coal-fired furnace, digging the clay up right there. No problems, plenty of materials. That's not the limitation. Plenty of people who know how to make bricks, always been making bricks in Australia for 200 years. We know how to make bricks, pretty easy anyway. All right, so okay, there are some possibilities, but from a cost leadership perspective, what's wrong with making all the bricks for the world in one giant brick factory? Transportation costs. If you want to use my bricks in Romania, guess what? They're more expensive than locally made bricks because I've got to put them in a ship and take them over there. So there are a range of factors that say, that's the maximum scale. After that, running the world's biggest brick factory starts to become more expensive. The world's biggest brick factory is going to employ 500,000 people. Let's say there's 500,000 people currently engaged in brick manufacture around the world. How do you run a business with 500,000 people all in one factory? Right? Is that going to be economical? I don't even know how to do it. No one knows how to do it. So we know how to run a factory with 20,000 people, but 500,000 people, we don't know how to do it. So we wouldn't be as efficient per person as the factory operations with only 20,000 people. So the massive scale of bureaucracy that you would have, the transportation issues and a whole range of other factors start to erode the fact that you can have bigger and bigger machines. Plus, of course, there's no such thing as a machine that can make all the bricks in the world. So we also run out of big machine. We bought the biggest ones you have, we've just got more of them. Well, if you're just going to have more of them, you've got to have 1,000 of these machines. Why not put some of them in other places where they're in better locations? So you run out of economies of scale, you just start to create problems rather than increase efficiency. But while there's bigger machines to have and there's not too many other limitations like transport, the bigger you are, the better in terms of cost. So we're now sort of going to jump across to look at Wesfarmers. Now, Wesfarmers is a classic example of a highly diversified business. And as you can see, resources, retail, chemical, industrial and safety, insurance, it's highly unrelated diversification. They're into very, very many different businesses. Now, Wesfarmers, as you can guess from the name, started out as a farming cooperative and then started to acquire other business units. And it just sort of accidentally kept growing because they were pretty good and still are pretty good at management. And so as they did well, they were a little bit ambitious and they bought some more businesses and they lost the farmer cooperative business objective a long time ago and have started to really become, for a long time now, 50 years, a conglomerate investment company. So they're really an investment company. They own a range of businesses. So it includes Coles and a range of different organisations. So why do you think they have this huge spread of different business units? What do you think might have motivated that? Good deals. There was a great deal. There was a company that was going for sale. Following the GFC, the global financial crisis, there were a lot of businesses that were still operating, but they were really shaky. They had lost all their cash reserves. They were right on the point. But there was nothing wrong with them. They just found it so, all the market had just disappeared and they kept paying their bills and they were sort of in trouble. The organisations that weren't so exposed to this, that were still financially quite strong, went on shopping sprees. The Australian banking industry went on a shopping spree and bought up banks all around the world that were quite good banks, nice little bank, the Bank of here, the Bank of Ireland and so forth. Nice little banks, but in trouble, needing a cash injection and that's about it. And they just went and bought it. So this is what Wesfarmers does. It buys businesses when they're a good deal, when they're like the Forester car. It's a great deal, half the price, can't go wrong. We're buying it for less than the physical resources that it comprises. Great deal. So they're quite good at that. And then they're quite good at pushing them into being efficient without trying to make them fit into a standardised corporate stamp. They allow them to keep their own identity, but are quite good at helping those organisations to do what they do a little bit better. And so under their ownership, Coles has continuously improved its performance. It was an acquisition target because it was struggling. They acquired it and now it's doing quite well. And between the cash injection that they provided and the overriding management direction, they've enabled them to do quite well. So Wesfarmers competes in a range of different business strategy levels. We've got budget retail. What do you think that is in terms of this diagram? Cost leadership. It could be broad, could be narrow. Industrial and safety. That's probably going to be, differentiated, okay? People don't normally get cheap about safety. Those two things don't go together too well. And so the retail, we know, I just told you that's Coles, so it's broad, and it could be cost or differentiated. Probably more like differentiated because Coles is not the cheapest. Okay, so, gosh, this is Okay, so you can see from this that there's a range of different business level strategies, and that's absolutely fine for them. They do very well on the stock market. Their overall performance is great. Do all of the companies work as well? No. It's a bit of an up and down, but they can continue to try to build the companies they acquire. What happens if it's just not working in this particular business? You know, the fuels, for example, is just not performing well because conditions make it really tough to be successful in that industry. What can they do? Sell it. They can jettison it. So is it going to be a big problem? Not really with that portfolio. They can afford to do that. So with this degree of diversification, they've got their fingers in many pies, which means that one market's up, one market's down. Overall, they're doing quite well. They've always got a couple of business units that are doing very well, some that are doing okay, and some that are doing badly. They can improve the ones that are doing badly, or they can move them on, and the organisation keeps going. So let's look at Jetstar now. We discussed the fact that they have a focus on cost, and here's a little bit of a breakdown as a percentage. So if we talk about the passenger fare being, that didn't work too well, did it? If we talk about the passenger fare being $1, obviously it's not, but if we just go for $1 and we break this down, you can see their various costs. So they've got marketing is 6 cents, it costs them 14 cents to lease the aircraft. Fuel's really expensive for the airline industry. 38% of their overall sales go straight into fuel. Staff are a bit of a cost, 16%. Also, airport services are quite expensive as well. That's almost 20% goes into using an airport, which is why the cheaper airlines like Target will tend to fly only from airports where they can get a special deal, and so forth. And so, as a result of all of this, what's their profit? Right out the front there on the left-hand side, 7%. It's not great. Get down about 5%, and you're talking about a cutthroat industry. Why is 5% a particularly significant profit margin? What's significant about 5% as a profit margin? It's low, but there's something else about it that's quite significant. Okay, so an aircraft is worth $500 million or so. If I went and sold one of my aircraft, and I took my bag with $500 million, and I went to the bank and I said, I've got $500 million, what deal are you going to do? Yeah, you can keep it long term, you can keep it for this aircraft that I sold that I had for 20 years, you can keep it for 20 years. What is the bank going to say to me? Thanks, and you can have 5% interest. I mean, for the stock market, I can get 10, 15% quite safely. Go to the bank, underwritten by the Australian government, bag of money, 5%. Is there any point in running a commercial enterprise below 5% return on assets? No. And the shareholders would say, what are you doing with our money? You're making 5%. This is all we're going to be getting back from you as profit. I can just go to the bank with this money. You've got to work harder. So they're pretty damn close to a very critical point in terms of revenue. So Jetstar has cut things down to the absolute minimum. How do they increase their profit margin? They can reduce costs, but let's just say those are all at the bottom. It's hard to get planes cheaper and stuff like that. Increase the price. You want to double your profit, you have to add 7 cents to your airfare. So that's a great idea, right? No, it's not a great idea because you're a cost competitor and your number one basis of performance is the lowest price. So this is a massive constraint. So yes, they're stuck doing what you suggested, trying to save 1 cent here, 1 cent there to make a difference. If they can get their fuel consumption down by 1 cent, that's added significantly to their profit margin. If they can refinance and shave 1 cent off that, that's going to save it. Marketing's already pretty cheap. How are you going to get that down much more? Probably not. Staff costs? Maybe they can shave a cent off staff costs. Port costs? Absolutely. 20% going there. They could shave a couple of cents off that. That's worthwhile. So that's it. What do you reckon? What do you think other revenue might be? Onboard sales, very good. Possibly not 10% though. That's a little bit high. We don't, on average, spend 10% in the plane. They'd love it if we did. Probably spend about 1% of our airfare in the plane. They do, as you know, sell food in the plane, so that's probably one of the main parts of the sales. They carry cargo. Because if you've got a bit of spare room in your plane, you may as well carry a few boxes and things like that and charge another $1,000 and get another 10 airfares worth of income. So keep the plane full. Do a little bit of transport as well while you're there. So that's that. That's how they manage that. So let's just look at a little comparison here. It's just an indicative diagram. We've got our average organisation on the left-hand side. It's an average price. Cost leaders have got two choices, and those are the two middle bars there. They can either say, well, we can just be well, if you look at the bar number 3, 1, 2, 3, the third from the left, you can be cheaper and you'll get lots of sales because your air flights are cheaper than your competitors and you've got a profit margin because your costs are low. You could, however, say, well, we're going to sacrifice a few sales by still being an average price competitor. We look like everyone else, but our costs are lower, so we're actually more profitable. We're just simply taking a larger profit from our sales. If you happen to be in a relatively uncontested market, that's exactly what can happen because you don't have too many low-cost competitors and you can just be in the middle there and actually charge a pretty decent profit, 20%, make a 20% profit, for example, and you still get sales because there's not that many choices or there's no one significantly below you. So if you have competitors around, you're a petrol station outlet, there's 4 of you in this particular town, you want to get more sales, you're going to be 10% cheaper. If there is 2 petrol stations in town, one's at one end and one's at the other end, you happen to be a bit cheaper because you're a bit bigger, you're more efficient, you're more clever with your staff. You can have the same price, you'll get half the customers, they'll get half the customers, you make more money, everyone's happy. So the greater the proximity to competitors, the more you'll be obliged to cut down your profit margins if you're already a cost leader, that is, you're running as cheap as you can be. However, if you're a differentiator, people will pay more. Well, I go there because this petrol station sells 100% environmentally friendly fuels. They're all made, I don't know, from sugarcane or something like that. And I buy my petrol there and I'm carbon neutral. And that's really important. And my kids are at school and their teachers are always talking about sustainability and they're always pushing me to. So we just go there. They're 10% more expensive, but I feel good about it. My kids are happy, so we do that. So we spend more. That company, their input costs are greater because they're using bio fuel products instead of non-renewable resources. Their costs are higher. They've still got their profit margin, and they are able to sell differently. So those are the different types of categories. We've got the average competitor, the cost leader with or without competitors around, and the differentiator. And you can see they're fundamentally different approaches. So the differentiator's costs, if you compare those to the cost leader, are looking like almost twice. But people will pay that for the differentiated product if they've got it right. If they've got it wrong, no. If I set up a petrol station and what's the current price of petrol, about $1.40 I guess, and my petrol's $2 but it's environmentally friendly, carbon neutral, then I'm going to still sell lots of petrol. And if my petrol costs me to sell $1.60 and I make 40 cents a litre, I'm still going to do that. But my competitors might be selling for $1.40 and they might be producing for $1. So their production is $1, they make 40 cents. My production is, what did I say, $1.60. So 60% more, but we still can both make 40%. People who go and buy the cheaper petrol don't care about the environment, that's one group. The people who really care and prepared to pay more, or just have a bad conscience, then I get those customers. That all make sense? Yeah? Good. So differentiation strategies based on the concept Qantas versus Jetstar. Qantas is reliable, Qantas is safe, Qantas is traditional, a little bit of comfort. So it's a little unique compared to Jetstar, and so it's sufficiently valued that people are prepared to pay for it. So if work is paying, are you going to fly Jetstar or Qantas? You're going to fly Jetstar? Who's going to fly Jetstar? All right, okay. You might be socially responsible and say, hey, we can save some money here, but otherwise, yeah, you're going to want to fly Qantas, right? Because it's better. So we always will spend more if we can justify it, if there's a return that we want. So we need to know whose needs we're meeting. So business travellers will almost always go for Qantas. So they know business class people, business travellers, they're our key market. There are other markets which we're not going to service with that, but we need to know who it is. So basic marketing analysis. We also need to know who our key competitors are, because you still have to be able to differentiate. It's not good enough just to say we are different from other sectors. You have to be different in your own sector, because that's what you're competing on. So if I went back to the example of Myers, there's another retailer, there's several large retail stores out at that time when Myers was highly differentiated, and David Jones was one of them. Now, David Jones also had all of these services, and if you look at the two David Jones outlets side by side in Collins Street, their main stores, very, very similar in all concepts. So, was one differentiated over the other? Not really. Actually, David Jones was slightly more expensive and slightly higher quality products. So basically, by just naturally tweaking their differentiation, half the customers went into Myers and half the customers went into David Jones. And then they came out and crossed over. So they were sort of differentiated from the broad market because they both had travel agents and haircuts and food and everything, and luggage and clothes in there. But they weren't particularly well differentiated within their own market segment, and so they had to divide the business up. And I can assure you, both of them would have liked to have had all of the business, but neither of them knew how to make themselves so different from the other one that they would have got more of the business. There was a third retail company that was very similar called George's, and that had been around for a long time too. And they did differentiate themselves, but it caused them to go out of business, which was quite interesting. They differentiated themselves by being the most expensive, and they had crazy luxury products. Still the same strategy, differentiation strategy, but they pushed it to the far end. So if you went back to Qantas, if you went back to Qantas, they were right out the right-hand side. Okay, they were expensive and they were really differentiated because you could buy things there that you'd never even seen before, you didn't even know existed. Fashion and stuff like that, if you wanted to buy that sort of stuff. Oh. Sure went the wrong way there. So they broadly differentiated themselves. However, they found that market constantly shrunk, which was quite interesting because during the time Australian affluence was increasing, but the ability to offer a similar level of differentiation, almost as much uniqueness, say, as David Jones, but for a much lower price, kept shrinking their market down to people, ultimately to people for whom price was of no concern whatsoever, who were completely price insensitive. And that became such a small market that they no longer had the economies of scale, and so their stock just sat on their shelves forever because they just didn't get enough customers. So they went out of business because their market kept shrinking. So although they differentiated themselves, they effectively ended up moving from broad market down to a niche, and it got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until they were unable to sustain the business through sales.
It must be evident that the market is shrinking. Why didn't they adapt?
Where would they go?
Broaden the range of products.
Then they become identical to Myers and David Jones.
Yes, but it's still like better to
It's better. And they did. They attempted that on a number of occasions. They attempted it for about 10 years, and it was too late because these are companies that had been in business for 100 or more years, so that they tend to have the dedicated clientele. So the idea that you would go to that shop and give up going to the other one, what was the point? So the customer loyalty was sort of enough to stop them doing that. They would have had to have become cheaper than the others to really have brought that level of sale in. Because obviously these companies are all about managing loyalty. Oh, you've got your David Jones card, you've got your Myer card, here's got a sale on, blah, blah, blah. And so that was enough just to keep those customers, because there was no particular reason to go to the New Georges. In fact, I think they even called it the New Georges. So they tried to relocate. They moved their big footprint stores to outer suburbs like Camberwell and things like that in an attempt to do that. They did all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, there just wasn't enough market left. And David Jones and Myers struggle to this day. Their profit margins are extremely thin, and they're really just hanging onto that market segment as well, by really dropping down to very, very slim profit margins. So that's that, and that's really the same as Qantas slowly creeping towards the Jetstar category. Okay, I don't think we need to, that's the US one, I think we've done enough of that. So the focus strategy, we've talked about that. Tiger, we've already given the example. To drive costs in particular, or to be the best at differentiation, you need to focus so that you are doing it for a smaller group of people, so that you can put all of your resources into doing that one thing. So a good example of that is the left-handed store in Sydney, where they've got all the left-handed things. So it's a very focused market. Is it cheap? No. There's only one left-handed store I know of in Australia, and it's in Sydney, and that's it. So if you want any special, there is actually a difference in scissors, left and right-handed, but they sell left and right-handed combs too, which is obviously a joke. So yes, if you want to go there, you don't worry about cost. You're going there because you're left-handed and you just like the luxury of once buying something that's designed for a left-handed person. So so that's an example of focusing, but not for cost. Obviously, if you want to be the cheapest, then you have to take a smaller segment of the market, as Aldi has done, to enable you to really focus on minimising your costs and reduce the level of complexity in the organisation associated with a broad range of customers. Differentiation focus, it's the other end of the example. A private jet or a charter jet company, take anyone, anywhere, under any conditions. You want a big jet? Yeah, we've got a big jet. You want a little jet? Yeah, we've got a little jet. You want to go here? You want to go Alaska, wherever? You can, as long as you're prepared to pay for it, you can have that. So that organisation is all about flexibility and adaptability. You want to have a party on the plane. You want to sleep on the plane. You want to do whatever, you want to fly very extra high, you want to go as high as anyone can go on a plane, whatever. All of these things are possible. You want to fly low, okay. You don't like flying through storms, okay, we can do any of those things. So that's broad differentiation, but it requires a high degree of flexibility. So that's the characteristic you have to build into the organisation. So, as we've been alluding to, organisations do better when they sit smack dab in the middle of those strategy domains than if they get caught between the two. So as we talked about the fact that as Qantas moves towards the Jetstar mode, if they keep moving there, they're neither going to be differentiated or a cost leader. They're going to be nothing. And this is the worst place. Now, for a lot of organisations, transitioning requires moving from one to the other. You can't be a cost leader on Monday and broadly differentiated on Tuesday. Well, you can, but there's 5 years between that Monday and that Tuesday. So on the Monday, you can be cost leader. 5 years later, on the Tuesday, then you can be broadly differentiated. It takes you that long. So there is this awkward point at which you're not one or the other anymore, and you're really not very competitive because you're not cheap, you're not differentiated. Why should anyone come there? Some people come there by accident, some people come out of loyalty. Good marketing will trick them into coming, whatever it happens to be. Lots of dynamics. We've got some cost leader products, come and buy those. Oh, just while I'm here, I'll buy some eggs and an insurance policy because you've got those, and I'll just get them while I'm here. Or I really always wanted a green stapler. You've got a green stapler, I'm just going to buy that. So you can sort of continue to trade, but long term there's no basis for success in that environment. So as I suggested, some companies will respond to this by going to the best value location, which is not a bad place to be. That's being stuck in the middle with a purpose. But it's, as I indicated, it's exhausting to be there, and the company will wear itself out. So you can only rest there for a while, and then you move on to the next location. And that is a reasonable approach. But just simply sitting on the boundaries between those is very difficult. Okay, so don't do it. Okay. The strategy clock. This is quite a nice little way of looking at how you can progress around the generic strategies. And it has that sense of flow. So let's just go straight to it. Okay, in position 1, between 12 o'clock and 12:50, or between 12 and 3 on the dial, if you like, we're in the differentiation zone, and customers think that's great. Lots of benefits here. You know, it's environmentally friendly. You've got a cafe. Get my hair cut, and it's a petrol station. Who can complain about that? Broadly differentiated, fantastic. I'll pay a bit extra because company pays for the petrol. I've got a fleet card, no problem. I get my free haircut. I sit in the cafe while you fill up my car. It's environmentally friendly, so my kids tell me I'm doing a good thing, and I'm not paying. So, fantastic. I'm always going there. So, broadly differentiated. However, as time goes on, we can move down to segment 4 and find that perhaps those benefits that we used to have aren't as attractive anymore. Work's cutting back on putting limitations on how much I can spend on fuel. Kids are growing up and they're not pressuring me to buy environmentally friendly fuel anymore. Got a bit older and I don't have as much hair to have cut anymore, or I don't really care about it. So actually, I'm in a bit of a hurry. I don't really want to go to that place. So my perception of the benefits aren't as good. But that's okay because, oh sorry, I'm actually jumping to 2 down here. So that's between, you can see 2 between 6 and 9. I'm jumping down there, but they've dropped their prices now, so yeah, all right, I'll keep going there because at least you've dealt with one of the issues, which was work was cutting back on the amount I can spend on petrol. Then we move around to 3, and we can see that we're really dropping down to low prices now. But we've managed to find a few new benefits. We've managed to come up with a few new things, so we're able to instigate. So I've been going to this petrol outlet now for 40 years. I used to go there because my kids pressured me into it and they had nice coffee. But now I go there because I'm retired, and it's a really nice place. I like the cafe, I like the position, it's quite a nice bit of garden. They give you free books to read, so I'm enjoying that. That's quite, there's some quite good benefits of going there. So yeah, I'll hang out there for a while. I come back and my car's been cleaned and it's been checked out and the fuel's in it, and I don't want to bother with that myself now. So again, I'm paying it myself now, but I'm prepared to pay it because I'm retired and I'm quite wealthy, and that's all fine. However, some of those petrol stations all said, okay, we will try to keep our price up, but we won't really offer very much because we used to do this stuff. We can't be bothered changing, and no one really values it anymore. But we need to keep doing it, and so we've got higher costs. But even though people don't value, so that puts us into the non-competitive strategy component, where I, as a retiree, or I, as a manager, would say, oh, I'm not going there. They're expensive, and there's no particular reason to go there. You know, I used to like doing that, but you know, it's not valuable to me anymore, and they haven't come up with anything else that's valuable to me, and they really are. I can't justify going there, so they're too expensive. So that's a non-competitive strategy. How would we? So if we imagined air flight became very fast, and airlines like Qantas kept saying, has anyone ever been on a flight that's so short they rush out with the food, they slap it down, and they take the tray away 5 minutes later because it's such a short flight? So imagine all flights became shorter, and Qantas kept saying, now we've got lots of in-cabin service, videos, food, plenty of serving staff or flight attendants if you've got any questions. But the flight's only 5 minutes. But as a result of that, our costs are quite high because we've got all this staff and this food and keep throwing it away and everything because no one eats it because they've only got 5 minutes anyway. But our costs are higher because we run those. Then they're not going to make sales, are they? Because although people used to value that, that was under conditions when you were stuck on the plane for 19 hours and you wanted to be well looked after, and you wanted it to be safe, and you wanted it to be reliable, and you wanted all these things. But for a 5-minute flight, people's expectations have changed. And if Qantas would be silly enough to run 5-minute flights, but continue with all of the cost overheads because they just didn't know how else to run the business, then they would be more expensive, and so they wouldn't be competitive. So they'd be offering services that once upon a time were attractive, but no longer are. In the same way, no one goes to Myers to have their hair cut anymore because we're all particular about it. When Myers used to do haircuts, there was 2 styles of haircuts. There was women's haircuts, which was long, and men's, which were short, and that was it. So you could run it very easily from a retail. Now, of course, everyone wants to choose a place to have their hair cut. They like the people. They've got their favourite hairdresser who does their hair. There's a cafe next door that they like to go to. Plus there's that really good organic greengrocer just down the street. They can get some fresh fruit and veg while they're there. So people have got a different concept. So no longer is it appropriate for Myers to offer haircuts in store. If they continue to offer them in store and carry the cost of that, that means that they're trying to differentiate themselves. But come to Myers because you can get a haircut there. Who doesn't want that? Buy a suit and get a haircut, right? It's a good idea. No one wants that anymore. So they're carrying a cost which is adding to their bottom line and making them uncompetitive. So that's what the strategy clock's about. So it brings our attention to the issue of price versus that the customer pays versus value. It also draws our attention to the fact that things keep changing, and you've got to keep changing how you compete, even if you want to stay in the same category. Strategic lock-in. When we talked about the strategic capability and competency analysis, we had the Vario test for strategic resources. There's another issue, which is strategic lock-in, where organisations are, for example, they've got a contract. Customers have a contract. We've got a contract with you to supply for the next 10 years. So they're locked in to single suppliers. Or you have my health records. Or you are the only one that can provide this particular thing that I need, and you just happen to have the patent on it, or you have control over a key component and I'm unable to get it anywhere else. So we can control the complementary products, such as we can control the software that's usable on our computer. We've got a computer, and it's a great computer, and it's $50. So everyone wants to buy this computer because it's fantastic, works really well, it's $50. But we control all of the software. So once you buy our computer and you get committed to the software, you're stuck with us. You've got to keep going because we're in control of that. Or we can create some industry standard that is difficult to avoid because it becomes so large, such as Windows. So the switching costs will keep people going there. And that's what organisations generally try to do. They try to increase the switching costs as much as they possibly can, because if they get a bit of strategic lock-in, they can be a little lazy or a little bit greedy with their, a little lazy about what they offer, or a little greedy about how much profit they take. So you think about it, if your switching cost at a particular transaction was $1, because you missed out on some otherwise benefit that you would gain. So perhaps they said, your next coffee's free and it's normally worth $1. So people say, oh, I'll go back there because one more coffee and I get a free coffee, that's pretty good. But the shop next door is selling coffee for 90 cents instead of $1. You're still going to go to the one with the one coffee out of 10 is free, even though the average price of the coffee is 90 cents, instead of going to the shop next door that's 90 cents. Because you're sort of locked in, because you're part the way through, you're committed. You've already invested by buying 8 coffees at $1 instead of buying 8 coffees at 90 cents. So you're just going to see it through so you can get your free coffee. So that's strategic lock-in. So this company, with its loyal base of people who've got the loyalty card going, are getting away with selling the coffee for $1 when the shop next door is selling it for 90 cents. So that's strategic lock-in. And enables you to take more profits, or as I said, be a little less cost competitive and get away with it. Strategic responses. This is one of the classic features of strategy which is poorly considered. Whatever you do, your competitors will respond to. That's their job, right? There are people who work in your competitor organisation whose job it is to look at what you're doing and come up with a counter idea. That's a given. So strategy is chess. It's move and counter move. It is not, you never get a free pass. The only time you get a free pass is when there are no competitors, because you've created a new market and there's no one else there. And then you can run amok and do whatever you like. But the rest of the time you're playing a set of rules which are defined by the other players. So you drop your prices, they drop their prices. You add a feature, they add a feature. You come up with a new technology, they acquire the new technology. That is a normal component of business operation. So what you need to think about is how you can do that and have them do that but still gain an advantage. So the whole idea of saying, for example, we're going to buy some new technology, it's better than the other technology, and our competitor's pretty financially viable, but we're going to do it anyway because that's going to work really well for us, is wrong. Because the competitor will just do the same thing and you're back to where you were. And whichever company was better able to afford to buy the technology will be the winner out of that. So if you had to borrow the money to buy a technology, but your other competitor just happened to have sold the business unit and has got lots of cash, then you're worse off than they are as a result of buying the technology, and you're no more competitive than they are. So therefore, that's a poor strategy. But nevertheless, organisations will do that. They will just assume for some crazy reason that their competitors have got no idea what they're doing, even though they're open as, to their customers. So that's a key thing. So they'll respond either directly by mimicking it, or they'll say, okay, they've done that, so well, that's not good for us. We'll do this instead, and we'll counter that. So they'll broadly differentiate, we'll drop our prices. They'll add more customer service, we'll add more product features. They will improve the customer experience, we'll open more outlets. So you need to determine what their likely response is and then work out whether that strategic move, that plan, that change is going to offer the advantage, or better still, to look at the other way and say, what move can I make that will give me an advantage irrespective of what the competitors do? Okay, I think that's the main thing. So one of the classic situation is that a low-cost competitor comes into the industry. Where do low-cost competitors come from? Overseas, yes, they can come from overseas. Generally, that's either another larger organisation in another industry that's got massive economies of scale say, we know how to be cheap. We're coming into your industry because we can be cheaper than you are. Or it's a brand new startup company that says we don't have any legacy, don't have any old equipment, we don't have any staff who've got a culture that's perhaps not quite right for this environment, we've got no debt, we're starting from scratch, so we can be finely tuned to the current conditions. So these low-cost competitors have some significant advantages over the companies already in there. So, question of course is, will they reduce your market share? That's the number one thing to be worried about. There's not much point if you've got 100 people and a new competitor enters your market and it's a subsidiary of a company with 10,000 people and has these huge financial reserves, fantastic with technology, brilliant culture. There is no point in entering into a price war because they just have to wait for you to run out of money and then they'll buy up your assets and take your best staff and say thanks very much, that was really good. So instead you need to trade on the loyalty, get away with charging $1 for the coffee instead of 90 cents and use that to increase the differentiation. So you might find that, for example, your customers will say, yeah, I know that, they're really cheap, but you know what we really want? We really want this, and we would be prepared to pay a bit more for it. So you go in that direction because this new market entrance is all about low cost. They're committed to that path. So you take a left-hand turn and you go in a different path and you let them have that segment and you take control of the other segment. So in effect, what's happened is that the appearance of the new entrant, the low-cost entrant, has segmented the market in a way that it wasn't segmented before. You may have had all the customers, now you've got fewer customers but they pay more, and there's another group of customers you never see that you used to see and they go and pay less. If you can't, then you have to think about strategic downsizing and saying, okay, there's still a segment of the market that we can service as a higher, as differentiated and higher cost, but it's we're going to lose those people who never really liked paying as much as we charge them. And adjust the business scale to be as efficient as you can in that environment. You can also do what Qantas has done. It says, well, that's not great. You know, what the premium passengers are just, the market shrinking. What's it going to do? It's going to keep shrinking. So that's not great for us. Let's start up Jetstar. No separate business units. We'll play both fields. We'll be the low-cost entrant. So, you might set up your own independent low-cost business. You can financially separate a separate business unit. It goes out of business. Annoying, but the business continues because the other business unit is still there. Or alternatively, you can say, well, what's going to happen long term? Well, we might end up just being Jetstar and Qantas was just a nice memory. Or who knows, but anyway, it gives us options. So, yes, one option, as I said, is to increase your level of differentiation. Say there's a segment of the market for us, sales volumes are the same, even though the number of customers has gone down, that's okay, we can live with that. Or can we live with being a bit smaller? And if we are a bit smaller, then let's think about starting up another business unit. Okay, hyper-competition. In hyper-competition, this is basically this position. This is another way of looking at the position, the best value position in the generic strategies that I talked about before. In this context, sustainable competitive advantage is not possible because the definition of what constitutes the most competitive stance constantly changes. The balance between differentiation and cost and the other things constantly shifting, and so you can't just say we are this because it doesn't last more than a day or a week or a month. So you're constantly changing. So you have to be incredibly fast and you have to have constantly take new initiatives and be at the lead, which is okay for a while, but year on year, all of that significant organisational change, changing people's jobs designs, cancelling old suppliers, getting new suppliers, bringing back those old suppliers, getting rid of them again and getting the new suppliers, getting two sorts of suppliers, getting them both together, getting rid of both of them, getting different suppliers, being in this location, being in that location, constantly changing, wears everyone out in the organisation damages relationships, you're not a preferred supplier, and it's hard to sustain it long term. So you tend to lose all your strengths, you tend to lose all of the legacy stuff that you build up. Your strategic resources can tend to get destroyed by being invested in and ignored and invested again and then changed. Too much tinkering, and basically the general value of the organisation, the strategic value of your resources reduces dramatically, the culture becomes fragmented and disengaged and so forth. So you've got to make lots of these small changes, and it ends up being death by 1,000 cuts. So you can keep going for a while, but ultimately this condition is extremely hard. This causal ambiguity is a problem for you, but you can introduce it. And that's a whole different concept, which I mentioned briefly the other day, the idea that by creating disruption in your environment, you can put your competitors off in terms of being able to judge what's going to happen next. If you can create enough disruption, you create a discontinuity and the whole market becomes new. And if you plan for that and you're ready for it, you can be emergent when the dust settles as the obvious go-to supplier in that market, because you're the only one who knows what's going on. But that requires a huge amount of planning and a lot of gambling. Cooperative strategies. Not all industries are aggressive in their competition. Sometimes they have relaxed competition. Well, we've got the market leader and they get to stay the market leader, and we're all happy with that, and we're all second tier and we're quite happy with that. And you know what? We have this area and they have that area. I referred to Aldi when the Aldi was the owner of Aldi handed down the business to his two sons. One had North Germany, one had South Germany. So they competed, the two different business units, because the two brothers didn't get on too well. They competed, but they weren't ridiculous about it. They said, we'll just divide up the territory. There's a lot of people in Germany, so half of that market is fine for me. And of course, they both then expanded internationally, and they divided up the world as well and said, well, there's no reason for an Aldi and a Lidl in each country. We either have an Aldi or a Lidl, and that's going to work better. So competition can be cooperative. And so co-opetition or cooperation is a sort of a mixture of being competitive to stimulate constant development without allowing it, as with the hyper-competition, to destroy value. So as a result of that, we can control costs because you cooperate on that rather than trying to lock in on one supplier and the other and squeeze the others out. It stops, as I said, undue forms of competition which are value destroying. It makes it difficult for new entrants to come into the industry. If it's an industry that's well coordinated, we hear that, for example, if there was more friendly cooperation in the Australian grocery supermarket industry, then they can say, well, we know that Walmart's coming here and they're going to put us out of business, but we'll cooperate and we'll block the market. We'll work together to make it impossible. We'll work. Coles, Aldi, and Woolworths will work together to make this a market that Walmart can't be successful in. They can control people going to alternatives such as online shopping and so forth and so on. So it's not, it could be collusion in which manage the prices. So we'll all put our prices up together so the customers are stuck paying these prices. There's nowhere to go. We're just going to all add 20% and that's just going to become 20% more expensive. That's collusion and that's illegal. However, the next level down, as I said, is cooperating to minimise destructive behaviours and provide a more coordinated and protected industry environment through competition is a positive. So how do you compete? Well, suppliers, in terms of suppliers, then if the group probably a classic example of this would be a cooperative, where the cooperative might be comprised of, you might have a milk cooperative, okay, and we produce, or a juice cooperative, berry juice company is a cooperative, and it's got a number of people companies who produce fruit, to make juice, and they buy as a group, they don't buy individually. So when they need fertiliser and trucks and all of those things, they buy them as a group. So when they go to the customer, the supplier, they say, we want 1 million tonnes of fertiliser, they get a good deal. They can also have a bit more control. They can achieve some sort of standardisations in the supply, which makes things a little bit easier as well. As a group, they're able to offer massive scale supply. So they say, Coles, how much juice do you want? No problems, we can provide that. So when a new market entrant comes and says to Coles, great, can we sell you some juice? Coles says, we want, oh yeah, this price and this volume, oh, we can't do that. Well, Coles says, no, we've already got the Berry Cooperative, they meet that, so no, we won't do business with you. They also, as a group, have a capacity to look at substitutes. Oh, so people are drinking bottled water rather than juice now. As individual companies, they probably struggle with that. Well, how can we compete with water? But as a group, they have the capacity to come up with innovations. Well, yeah, water's all right, but it doesn't taste very good. But have you ever tried this combination of guava and pineapple and green tea? Okay, well, that's pretty good, and that's so much more healthy than water. So as a group, we can offer that product and we can compete against the substitutes that otherwise might create problems for us. They can also have more control over the suppliers. BHP does this. Steel is a commodity price, iron ore is a commodity price product. However, companies like BHP provide such a large portion of that, they can work outside the commodity pricing and saying, sure. So, for example, they can go to China and say, sure, you can have this quantity of steel, you can have this quantity of coal, this quantity of iron ore. However, you can't have it at commodity prices. And if we don't supply it to you, then you won't get it because you can't get it elsewhere. There's not enough in the world. You need so much that, and we provide such a significant proportion that you have to buy through us and you have to buy at our rates as opposed to that. So we've got control because we're a primary supplier, or we have something about us. We have the only organic guava juice in Australia. You want to sell guava juice, yeah, you might say that that's what you want to pay for it, but this is what you've got to pay for it, or this is the conditions under which you have to purchase it, or you've got to put our label on it, you can't make it Coles brand, because we have control over that. And by the way, it's the same deal for the grapefruit juice as well, because if you want the guava juice, you've got to extend this to the grapefruit juice. So they can use their power to increase they can use their combined resources and their combined operations to increase or improve the balance of power between them and their customers. Okay, so this language which I put in because it's in the textbook is probably a little more commonly used in the US than in other countries, but certainly there is this idea that you rely heavily on your substitute products. So I think the classic case for me of this is actually outboard motors, where the outboard motor manufacturers who make the motors that go on the back of boats, sell them at cost price, because they discovered that people will own these outboard motors for 20 years. In fact, on my yacht, I have an outboard motor which I'm astounded to say was built in 1965. Still works fine, no reason to replace it. I don't use it that often that I feel like I've got to have a new outboard. They don't look really that different. So there's no particular reason to replace it while it continues to work. So can you imagine how much has been spent on that outboard motor in terms of spare parts? So on average, something like owners spend 10 times in spare parts and service of what they would on the purchase. So of course the idea is to get someone to buy your outboard motor because they're going to be a loyal, locked-in customer for 20 years, and if they bought the outboard motor for $5,000, they're going to give you $50,000 over that period of time in sales. So more than anything, you want them to buy your outboard motor. So they sell their outboard motors at cost, to make them as cost competitive as possible in an attempt to make the sale. So it's the same with the razor blade. The handle's really cheap, but the blades are really expensive. So anyone notice that when you go to buy razor blades? It's like you can buy almost a new razor and blades for the same price as the blades. And why? Because Once you've got the handle, you just want the blades again, don't you? You don't want to throw the handle away because you're sort of committed to it. So you're locked in. Then the next category, you offer some free services. So you all see this as software, don't you? You've got the entry level thing and that's free, but you want that extra service and you've been using it for 5 years and you're really committed to it and the cost of changing is high. Finally, you pay for it. So Spotify is a classic example of that. Or you can bring together different groups of customers and things like that. So you've got Uber, for example, Uber Eats, okay, bringing together restaurants and individually driven transport services. So there are different emerging approaches. So we've got 3 dimensions that we need to think about. One is how do we create value? What is it that the end user will experience? And don't forget, while we're tending to use commercial enterprise language, value creation for refugees, value creation for cancer sufferers, value creation for the ratepayers in a suburb is the same. In each case, we're trying to work out how we create value for them, and we still need to answer these questions. They're just the answers are slightly different. Then we have to work out how we can configure it. Where is the value? Is it because you buy the handle but the razor blades are super high tech, or do you buy the super high tech handle and then to keep that high tech handle you've got to buy the razor blades which are low tech? And how do we arrange things so that people are prepared to pay for it? So people are only prepared to pay so much for a razor blade. You won't get people buying a $100 disposable razor because, so although your margin might be quite good on that, you're not going to achieve that. You've got to sell the razor for say $20 or something like that. So how do you create a profit out of selling something at that level? Well, the answer is you've got to sell your razor blades through the supermarket chain because you can't have a point of outlet for a product like that. You can't have your own points of sale. You can't have a Gillette razor blade shop. You've got to sell through chains. And you rely on their infrastructure to minimise your cost. Coles is very cheap in terms of transporting stuff around, warehousing, displaying and so forth. So they'll do all that stuff. So you've got to pump your product through them because that's where this high-tech handle, low-tech blade, lock-in deal works. But if you take that same deal and you put it in a different context, like we're going to have our own Gillette shops, you won't make any money. Strategy canvas, we just choose a couple of critical success factors and we have a look at what's happening over time, usually, and check out how this works with our competitors and see if there is an opportunity to, in that spectrum, to gain an advantage. And let's look straight at the example here of Circus Oz. So Circus Oz is an alternative to Cirque du Soleil. You all know Cirque du Soleil and probably know what. Does anyone know Circus Oz? No, that's what I thought. So it's been around for a long time. It's Australian. It's mainly in Australia, but it does go overseas. It's the same sort of deal. It did precede Cirque du Soleil and a different part of the world at the same time. It's the concept of a modern circus where you don't have mistreated animals, but you've got actors doing basically the same thing that we used to do, the animals, which is embarrassing themselves, doing dangerous things and so forth. But they're choosing to do it instead of being forced to do it, so hence it's a modern circus. So, new space, because traditional circuses, they had the bear and they had the horses and they had the jumping dogs and they had the lion and the fire and stuff like that. New space, actors, drama, events and so forth and so on. Anyone been to Cirque du Soleil or any of those? There's a Russian one as well. You know, they're very, very dramatic. There's people reading poems in the background. There's live music, very dramatic lights and so forth. It's more like theatre and less like a traditional circus. And so anyway, so that's the nature of these. Circus Oz is a classic example. So let's have a look at them. Ringling Brothers is a US circus that tours internationally. The green border, where have I written it on this? It should say it anyway. It's Circus Oz. Yes, I haven't written it on there. That's silly of me. And then we've got little regional circuses, just little mini ones that just tour around a local area. So if we, along the bottom there, you can see we've got a whole range of dimensions, and the vertical axis is just quantity or strength, if you like. And you can see that the Circus Oz is in some free space, and this is the most important thing. In terms of a more luxurious viewing environment, more theatre, more light, better food, production approach where you actually basically all scripted and it's delivered like you deliver a play. So you might deliver a play 100 times. If you're lucky, you might get to deliver it a few thousand times. So that's where you get economies of scale and scope. So you can have multiple productions. It's artistic. All of those bits to the right are outside what the others offer, and therefore provide a basis for what. If it offers things that the others don't offer, it must be differentiated. Very good. Okay, it's not low cost. Why is it not low cost? Well, it don't have to be, but more importantly, it can't be because they're doing extra things. So a traditional circus has what, like a horn and 3 people. This got a full orchestra, so it's more expensive. So the costs are higher because they're doing more, and that's part of the territory, so you pay more to go to these things. Quite expensive, actually. We can see, however, if people like to see performing bears, it is not the right place to be. You should go to Ringling Brothers and see the performing bears. If you want to see performing bears, you don't get that at Circus Oz. That's one of the defining features. So they don't sell food in the aisleways, popcorn and stuff like that. They don't have multiple shows going on at the same time. As I said, no animals. They don't have star performers, the one person on the trapeze that everyone goes to see. Those are the things that they don't have. Those are the things that Ringling Brothers make money out of, and that's the area that Circus Oz has chosen to exit. Then we've got some common categories in that mid-band there, in the centre there, where they all offer a bit of fun and humour. That's just a feature of the circus, so you have to have that or it's not recognisable as a circus. It would mean Circus Oz had become theatre. And some sense of thrill and excitement. Again, that's a feature of the circus which enables them to lay that claim. Why don't they just take those out? What would be the problem with taking out the fun, humour and thrills? Yep, so but take it out. What's the problem with that? Yeah, and what's the problem with not being a circus? So that's fine, they've already changed it anyway. What is it if it's got theatre qualities, theatre food, theatre comfort, and no risk or thrill or fun and humour? What is it? Not just a different industry, it's theatre, right? And there are already theatres. So Circus Oz just becomes another theatre company. Nothing special, nothing differentiates them. It's the fact that they're in 2 different categories that makes it different. If you want to take your kids to the theatre, you take them to traditional theatre, they're and when can I get some food? I need to go to the bathroom, etc., etc. You take them to Circus Oz, and they're fixated and they're fascinated, and you don't mind it because actually it's quite good quality entertainment instead of watching dancing bears and things. So you're happy and they're happy, and that's what's different. So they can't take out the right-hand side and they can't take out the middle part because then they're no longer differentiated. So they're stuck with that. Now, weirdly though, they don't do the fun, humour and thrills as well as even the regional circus. Why? They could, couldn't they? They just have some cannons, shoot some bullets at people performing. There's lots of thrills and danger then. Why don't they just add in a few of those things? That's a possibility. It's not what I was looking for. I don't disagree with it. That's certainly a barrier.
Perhaps it is exactly what they were actually, they didn't want to do that.
Yeah, why don't they want to do that?
Because they don't want to be the revolution of
But their blue ocean-y bit is really the fact that they're charging, instead of $20, they charge $80. And they offer the theatre type thing, which the others don't offer. So they're already in a different space. Yes. It would. They might lose it by dilution, absolutely, too much. So how many, if we look at good things, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Ringling Brothers, which is successful, has got 1, 2, 3, 4 market-leading things. They've already got sort of 5 market-leading things. So maybe that's enough. The flip side is, how much do you actually need? Why don't you have 10 market-leading things? Sounds good to me. Or 15, or 20, or 100, or 1,000. What's wrong with this idea? Too expensive. There's the stuff that's particularly special, and there's the stuff you do to qualify. They do just enough fun, humour, and thrills to be identifiable as a circus. There is no point in doing more than that, because that doesn't add any advantage, it just adds cost. So if you say, but I just have someone on the floor shooting at the acrobats, that's good, right? No, there's a cost, because the acrobats are going to want to be paid an awful lot if someone's shooting at them, right? Then they go, but this is danger money now, I want $10,000 an hour, please, if you're going to have someone down there taking pot shots at me. So that's no good. So there's no cheap way to add a differentiating factor. So what they've done is they said, point is well made, that we don't want people to get confused and think that this is just a traditional circus, so we don't want to play that up too much. But also, from a cost perspective, we only do enough of those differentiators to get where we need to be. This is not their main thing. Their main thing is really theatre, which is all the stuff out to the right, and they've got plenty of that. Everyone says, oh, I'm really happy. The food's great, the seats are great, the look's great, the acting's great. That's enough. I'm having a good time. It's worth the $80. And I get to have my kids to come along because there's a bit of fun and thrills there as well. And yeah, that's good enough. They're happy with that. So yes, we wouldn't want to pay an extra $20 a ticket to have more of that stuff, because you've already met our requirements. So that's what the strategy canvas helps you do. Count how many leading features you've got, work out what category they're in, make a sensible decision about where you need to be. And so if we saw Circus Oz with the 2 green dots in the middle up, say between the Regional and Ringling Brothers, and then they rang us up and says, can you give us some advice, please? We'll pay you $10,000 consulting fees. You say, bring that fun, humour, thrills and danger down a bit. You're doing too much of that. You don't need to do as much of that. You've already got enough advantage. Just do enough to clearly comply so that when someone walks in, they can tell it's a circus. That's all you need. Funnily enough, sometimes companies that make these decisions physically label them. It's still called Circus Oz. It's not the entertainment venue or something like that. They physically put labels on. And now you'll get some thrills. Oh, okay, that was the thrill part. Good, thanks. Yeah, I might have missed it, but you're right, it is a thrill, isn't it? Yeah, that was good enough. But otherwise I wouldn't have noticed, because normally I'm expecting cannons blowing up and people flying out of them and things like that. That wasn't as thrilling, and balancing on chairs, but it was thrilling enough. But good you reminded me, because I sort of wouldn't have noticed it otherwise, because you're playing it down a bit. It's not as dramatic. The performance level is not as high, so I may not have noticed that by comparison. But in actual fact, when you reminded me, it was enough. So often companies will actually physically remind their customers that they actually got that thing, just in case they missed it when it's a secondary feature. Okay, so this leads us to our strategy, which is basically around getting our costs down so we can be more profitable. In this instance, they chose to eliminate the star performers, the animals, selling popcorn in the aisles and having multiple show arenas because they didn't add any value to the way they wanted to compete. They did, however, increase the uniqueness of the venue. Where they held it was a fun way of making it a more exciting thing. So traditionally, where is the circus? Where do you go to circuses? Who's been to a circus? Where are they? Yeah, a football ground or somewhere like that. Is it right in the middle of town? It's in the suburbs, in the outskirts. There's often one at Caulfield Racecourse, for example. There are those sorts of locations. That's fine, you go there to the circus, no problem. Where do you think Circus Oz is to be found? Sometimes you find it beside the Yarra River in the city, just next to Federation Square. Interesting location. Walk along, Circus Oz. Oh, we go back there tomorrow? Yeah, okay. So, choosing some unique venues. It's not that big a deal, but it adds to the differentiation. We already talked about reducing fun, humour, thrills and danger down to a level where it's not our main thing. We've got to keep some of it so we can keep the label of circus because being a circus and being theatre is our thing. You know, really fun and danger is to be had anywhere. It's the theatre stuff which is the more exciting. So we'll just reduce that down to the minimum level that we still can achieve the differentiation. What do we need? We need themes. We need our next season is all going to be about interstellar travel. Or our next season is all going to be about underwater. Or our next season is going to be all about education, whatever it happens to be. And that provides this continuity because that's part of theatre. Circus is jump, jump, jump. There's a bear jumping through the flames. I don't get it. Then there's a lion eating someone, and then there's popcorn. What's going on? It's just a mixed jumble of things. So that's a differentiator as well. Refined environment, more comfortable seats for the parents because they really want to go to theatre. They did circus when they were young and they're over it now. You go to circus 10 times and you never need to go again. That being 10 times, they need to take their kids 10 times, but if you can make it more pleasant, then they're happy with that. They can run multiple productions, so they've got their education one going, they've got their underwater theme, and they've got something else so that you can go to Circus Oz 3 times. If you go to Silver's Brothers, they're in Melbourne a lot, and you see the show, are you going back again? Are you going back again ever? Maybe in 10 years' time you go back again. I'm hoping that the show hasn't changed. They've still got the same bear. They've still got the same lion jumping through the fire. They've still got the same person balancing chairs. It hasn't changed. So by having multiple things, they can stay in the same location. They've got 3 different shows on at different times in the day, and you go and see all 3 different shows maybe. That was really good. I reckon I want to go and see the underwater show because that looked really good too. They ran for a couple more weeks. Get some friends together. We'll come back again. Repeat business. So they can have multiple productions because they had the scope to do that, whereas a traditional circus doesn't. Artistic music and dance are part of the theatre. Okay, we quickly look at Cirque du Soleil. Not surprising, they're very similar indeed. I don't think we need to say really much more about that. They're picking up on the same features. Probably the only thing to point out is if you look at that theme category, that spike there, we go back, it's a little more pronounced than Circus Oz. Circus Oz is a little more humble, whereas Cirque du Soleil is very extreme. And often you don't quite understand what's going on, and that's sort of part of the mystique. So they push that to the limit, and in doing so they're trying to differentiate themselves even a little bit more from theatre by being obscure. So people tend not to go to obscure theatre. Obviously there is a segment, but the mainstream theatre is not obscure. But this is often quite obscure as to how the scene, which is highly integrated, is what all of it's supposed to mean. Okay, the wine industry, you can have a look at that. I don't think there's much to say about that. Generally, we see broad differentiation. We've got a range of different categories. Premium wines just sit up. Yellowtail's an Australian company that sells in the US quite successfully. Generally, they just choose to be high performing at all levels, and in budget wines, just basically we just do a bit less of all of these. Why are the high performing wines at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points? Because we just talked about the fact that maybe 4 points is enough. Why do Australian wines perform pretty much equally on all levels? It's too much, right? Well, it is. That's the answer. It's too much. Why would they do that? Any ideas? You're a premium winemaker, and you've been making it for 200 years in the same place, and you're the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchild of the person who hand-built the winery themselves from rocks they dug out of the ground and grapes that they had, seeds that they had brought back from that they had found in Egypt and had grown into and spread and developed and so forth, and so you have this little bit of history. What are you going to do? Answer is everything, right? This is all about pride, and yeah, we're here for the long haul. 100 years is nothing for our planning cycle. We don't cut corners on anything because we are a premium wine producer, and that's what we do. So this is driven by pride. Now, rather luckily, it provides an advantage, because if I did a premium French wine from that era, it would score low in a couple of these categories. Aging quality was very unpredictable in French wines. Often they would go off quite quickly because they just didn't have the microbacterial control systems in place. They had the legacy and the prestige of the vineyard. Wine complexity, generally, but Australian wines have more complexity because there's a market for that. Wine range, very narrow. So premium French wines probably had about 4 or 5 only of these, and they did quite badly in the others. But hey, French wine, it's good, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But the market quite liked the idea that all of these dimensions were provided, because if you've got a premium wine, it's great. You buy it and you discover, oops, I've actually kept that for 20 years, and that happened. Oh well, hey, it's still drinkable. That's pretty good, isn't it? So there was, accidentally, because of the nature of the product, there was quite a high degree of acceptance of it doing everything. But that wouldn't have worked for Circus. That's too much. It's too expensive, because don't forget, you take a family of 4 people, $80, that's a lot of money, right? If you tell them it's $120, then you're not going to get so many customers. But this is still a bottle of wine. It's still $40, $50, $60. Or is it? How much is a premium wine? Thousands. So there's also another segment there as well where people don't care about costs and they're going to pay anything for it. But the Circus is neither of those, right? It has to have a bit of best value about it. It can't be too expensive. So there are some markets for that. So some premium wines are still pretty cheap, and even though you might say, wow, $40, but it's really good, you'll pay it because it's only $40 and you don't have to worry too much. It's not $4,000. And then there's another group of these that are so expensive that they're only bought by people who don't care about the price, and it's all about the fact that they've got a bottle of Grange Hermitage, which was for many years has been the world's premium wine as an Australian wine. And people pay any money for that, particularly a good year for that. So it happened that on their strategy canvas this worked quite well. But was it by design? No, it was by luck. It was driven by pride rather than by intention. So if you look at budget wines, however, it's basically the minimum required. Why do people buy budget wines? Particularly in the US, and let me give you a hint, you buy it in a big glass jar about this big. I'll be generous. They buy it just to have wine. They don't care what the characteristics are. They're not going to keep it. They don't care if it's got pedigree or prestige. They just want to have some wine. So therefore, you minimise all of the costs. However, saying, it comes from the Mordialloc region, which has been a traditional wine growing region. Anyone know where Mordialloc is? No? Okay, it's just an outer suburb. I just chose one at random for Melbourne. It's very cheap just to throw those lines in. Okay, if you've got your factory in Mordialloc and you make wine there in a large brick factory, you can still claim the territory, and maybe some people will attribute value. So it was really cheap for them to do the one thing, which was to describe it, because that's just words. But everything else they kept as a minimum for the budget wines, because that customer group just wanted cheap wine. Whereas the others, as I said, really overdid it, overplayed it, and there are things that you don't really need, but it happened to be that the market was quite accepting of that because it is a luxury product. Wine, chocolate and cheese are very expensive products, and they're all in the luxury category. So it's a little bit different, whereas the circus thing is a luxury, but it's the market, that particular market segment is still going to look for a greater level of value. So, what would you say about that? Well, we could eliminate the terminology distinctions, although I would argue against that because it's pretty cheap to put a few words on the label. It doesn't take much, from my own experience. It takes you about an hour or two to think up of quite an exciting and fancy way of describing your wine. Do you need aging qualities? Do you need it to be so biologically stable that it's still good in 20 years' time? Yes, if you're an Arctic explorer and you're taking your wine with you and you want to leave it for next time, how many people hang on to their wine here for 20 years? Actually, I do, but it's quite rare. So you could get rid of that and you'd lose a tiny percentage of the market, 1 out of when we got 15 people. So you'd lose a 15th of the market. Above the line marketing, probably again, these things tend to, because they're around for so long that your great-great-grandparents bought this wine, so you tend to buy it for that reason, rather than because you've just heard about it. If you're a small new wine producer, that's a different deal, of course. Can you increase the price? Well, you can. If you can get people to think it's like a Grange Hermitage and you can charge them $5,000 for a bottle. So yes, you could instead of $40 for a bottle. That's a 100-fold difference in price for basically the same product. So a bit of room to move there. Retail store involvement. If you've ever been into a wine bottle shop, what does it look like? The new ones. They used to be quite small, but now they're warehouse format, and they have what? I reckon 1 billion bottles in there. They don't really have 1 billion bottles, but it looks like they have. How many brands do they have in there? Brands you couldn't conceive of. I had no idea that they made wine in here or there or whatever. And it's purple too, that's interesting. So get the retail store a little more involved, promote your product, they get some sort of kickback. You sell 1,000 cases of our wine, we'll give you a free, I don't know, beach toy or something like that, an umbrella, stuff like that. So get the retail store to push your product. Yeah, that's a good one. Reduce, maybe the wine complexity is cutting out a bit of the market. French wines are relatively non-complex. That seems to work perfectly well for them. If there's money being spent on making the wines more complex, maybe it's overdone, overcooked. The wine range is very large. Australians like part of the pride thing. We produce every single type of wine you can imagine, and some of our own as well. So it's like a car company having 100 different models of car. Do you need that many? Probably not. Does it cost you more? Absolutely, because you've got to stock so much of each type of wine, and you've got all this inventory, plus all the different manufacturing processes, and it goes on and on. Reduce the vineyard prestige? Not sure. They could try to do that. What wineries do tend to do is they are very successful, and this winery's been here for 250 years, and the grapevines were planted by the original owner, and their blood is still in the soil and all this sort of stuff, and they're buried just over there and all that. Then they get another block of land, and they give a slightly different name to the wine, but it's by the same people, so there's an attached prestige. And then they open up another outlet in another state of Australia, and it's still from them,
third level prestige. So they replicate out, but if you look at the profile and cost of the wines, you go down a step with each level of separation. So you can trade on that. And that's probably the most sensible thing, rather than just say, actually, we're not as good as we used to be, but rather you can increase your volume and say, and why would you go to another site? Because the site that you had happens to be right in the middle of the city now, and that land is incredibly expensive. It's in a major tourist area, that land is incredibly expensive. It's on the beach, that land is really expensive. You're buying some land that's 1/10 of the price, so you're operating, and really much more suitable, major highways and all that sort of stuff, much more suitable for wine production anyway. So you've reduced your costs, but you're managing to transfer, even though there's some loss of prestige, you're managing to transfer it over. You could create some ease as well for the customer and add some excitement and stuff like that, which might be desirable. Okay, so if we look at the at Yellowtail, we see that compared to the very top wines, they don't do so well in a whole range of categories that you might even expect of, even worse than the cheap wines. So you can see the green line's the cheap wines. They don't do well, but for some reason, they are better priced. Why, or as well priced as the cheap wines? Because they're choosing to compete on just three things. Ease of drinking, ease of selection, and fun. So they're saving money on above-the-line marketing, aging quality, no one wants that anyway, vineyard prestige. They're not really going on that, and they're hardly spending anything on it. They've got a cheap vineyard location. They don't try to bother to make too complex a wine. And they don't have a very big range either, and so that makes life easier. It makes their product cheaper, so they've got more profit margin. But then they turn some of that savings into finding ways of making it more drinkable, easy to access, easy to buy this wine. Really easy to choose, lots of market research into how people choose wine and really optimising what they say for that, rather than having this whole range of, well, this is 20% Merlot and 40% Cab Sauvignon, whereas this one is 5% Merlot, 6%. Which one do I want? They categorise it in different terms of, oh, I know, okay, well, this is barbecue wine, this is party wine, this is late night wine, this is early morning wine, yeah, I get that, okay? That's how I buy my wine. So they work that out for their particular market, different markets, they've probably got different labelling, and they had a bit of fun and adventure and excitement, balloons or fun labels, whatever it happens to be. So they put their money into that, but they saved their money. So they spent their money on just three things, and they do basically almost as well, similar level of performance to the high quality wines, but in an area where no one does any of that. And then they basically save money on everything else and do worse than the rest of the market. But overall, the impact is that they can charge a similar price, but at lower cost. Because they're saving a lot of money on points number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in exchange for just doing well in points, the last 3 points. And that's basically enabled them to take market segment, operate relatively cheaply, and still be able to sell their product at a reasonable price. So that's a fairly much a marketing sort of thing, because you think everything to the right is what you would get out of marketing. So they've really relied extensively on their marketing competency to achieve that. But it could just have easily been a technical competency. It's just a question of what they had in that free range out to the side that no one else does. You want to see that one? Okay, yeah, clear? Good, all right. So that's Blue Ocean, the bit out to the right. We talked about Blue Oceans. It's non-contested. If no one else is doing it, then you get free rein. If another company comes in and they call themselves Greentail or Redtail, and they do a little bit better in easy drinking, easy selection, fun and adventure, then they completely destroy Yellowtail's competitiveness because they don't have anything else. So it's got to be a Blue Ocean where it's not contested. As soon as you bring 20 players in there, you've got red, green, blue, orange, purple, white with pink spots, tail, then everyone's competing, and it becomes hyper competition because there's hardly any basis for competing in that blue ocean, and then it becomes a red ocean. All right, we're at the end. It did take a little bit longer. Sorry about that, but I thought we had a number of good cases and I really wanted to work through those. So let's have a break for just 5 minutes. If you want to come back, we'll quickly go through the iCare case after that. To recommence, because we've only got about 5 or 10 minutes left. I spent a little bit more time on, because we didn't have a big group, I thought it might be nicer for you to hear a little bit more about the examples we had this week, rather than spend as much time on the case analysis. I did expect to finish a bit quicker. I do apologise for that. I think the slightly late start probably contributed to this. At any rate, let's spend 5 minutes or so on the case with 4 of us. 5 of us. Okay. It's IKEA. How does IKEA compete? What's their generic business level strategy? Cost leadership. Why are they cost leaders? Okay, well that's how. So I just jumping ahead, I agree, they're cost leaders, it's quite self-evident. How are they cost leaders? Well, that's a separate thing, which I wanted to come back to in a second. Yep. Yet they do have simplified design, that's true. But actually, they own their whole supply chain. They make their own stuff. They ship it themselves. This is a high-risk strategy. They have the volume to be able to do this, right? If they were very small, then they would be uneconomic. Because they're large enough, they can do this vertical integration. It's high risk because they're committed to this. And that's the drawback for them. IKEA can never be anything but IKEA, can it? It can't really transform itself in any significant way. It's pretty much trapped where it is. So the whole idea of the flat packaging, the IKEA style, the IKEA quality is all inherent in their design and the fact that they own design process, which is unusual. They own, and in the case it's pointed out that they're not even just manufacturing, they're getting right back to the forests even, where the wood originally comes from, and they do all of their distribution and all of their sales. So they are very traditional, they own the whole supply chain. Why do they own it? Because of history. Was it 1948? Is that right? I think when they started, I'm sorry, I can't hear you over the... Oh, thank you for that. My apologies. I was busily putting it up and I was wondering what your gestures meant. Ta-da. Ah, we are. Ta-da. Okay. So yes, I was putting these notes up. Thank you for that. I think they started in 1948. Now, basically that way. They made the product and they sold them in the store, and they just made it bigger. They didn't change this. So it's very traditional, highly vertically integrated thing. But because they are so specific, and they do have an advantage, which is reasonable design at a low price, so they're cost leaders. But are they the very cheapest furniture providers? The answer is no. So they're a little differentiated, and they're probably fairly close to that best value point in reality. But they're getting away with it. It's probably a challenging ride for them, really, because they're always reinventing their products and things like that. They don't have, you notice that? IKEA doesn't have anything that's the same. Their style and their products and everything seems to change. The materials they use changes. They don't have their classic products, really. And so there's a lot of searching for the, okay. So they're cost leaders plus differentiation, which basically we don't recommend, but it's not really being caught in the middle. What they're doing is trading off because they are cost leaders for the market that they're in. So there's also some market. Oops, that's the A out. So there's some market targeting as well. They're not the cost leaders for furniture across the board. You can buy cheaper furniture out of China, but it doesn't have the same style, it doesn't have the same quality. So for people who require a certain amount of style, a certain amount of quality, they are the cheapest. If people want a lot of style and a lot of quality, you don't go anywhere near IKEA either. So it's clearly defined that. But within that segment of the market, they're the cost leaders. So this means market segmentation, which is what's enabling them to achieve that. All right, jumping ahead now in the couple of minutes we've got left, the strategy canvas. What do you think might be some of the bases on which they compete? Supposed to be a textbook down there, which I haven't got anymore. What might be some of the bases on which they compete? Design, okay. Good, thank you. Anything else? Range, yep, that's good, thank you. Yep. Range. What else? Availability, I don't know whether they do that. How about transportability?
Like the store availability.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, okay. There's another one of these somewhere, it doesn't matter. I'll pop that in here. Oh, come on. Was there another term? Did I just... No, that's everything, isn't it? All right. We could do a few more, but let's just go with these ones. So, design, where are we going to put them? I think back from the spot. Where are we going for design? If this is at maximum, this is the minimum. They're about halfway, aren't they? They've got something. So here we might have, if I quickly put insert text box. Let me see. If we had a leading designer, then they would be up very high here. Oh. That would be high. This is IKEA. Okay, range, high, yep. Okay, whereas the leading designer would be low. So I should change the colour of these. That would have made life much easier, wouldn't it? All right, the leading designer would be low. Okay, location, probably the same. They've probably both got premium locations. Because you can't be a leading designer in a boring location. Maybe they're slightly below. Maybe the leading designer can afford it. And transportability, IKEA is high. And the leading designer is low. Okay. All right. Okay, so what happens? Obviously, we'll be like 1 minute and we're done. Leading designer is successful because they've got three of these high points.